Lucas Bretz, LRB Aquatics, YouTube, and lrbaquatics.com. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Sabu. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. I don't know if I'll be doing any tunes here, but I do the tunes on the channel. Oh, come on. Don't be heckling me now. But I hope you guys are all doing great. If not, I hope it gets better for you. But today I'm going to be talking to you guys about keeping aquariums natural and simple and different ways to do it, because there's so many ways to keep aquariums. Filter, no filter, everything. We're going to cover substrate, lighting, and just many variables that you can do, even with breeding fish, microorganisms, and a whole lot. So keeping aquariums natural and simple, which I actually had a revision of this 2.0. For some reason it didn't save properly because Microsoft and Apple deal. I'm not sure what happened there, but this is my old house where I had over 300 aquariums. I ended up selling it with all the aquariums in it, so another guy actually runs it now named Aquatic Peace. But this was more when I was using airlines and doing more filtration. I currently have a new place in Florida where I have put up 300 aquariums in just the last year. And a reason why I can do this is because I'm working with nature, which makes it a lot more simple to keep that many aquariums by myself. I don't have anybody else helping me with doing water changes or doing anything else or building. It's all what I do. So big things is balance and stability within your aquariums. Often when we're starting new aquariums, they haven't been balanced yet naturally. And in this talk, you're gonna hear me recycle a lot of key words like balance, stability, biologically sound water, things like that. And this is kind of an overview of what we're getting into. And then plants and or algae is key. So they really help with these no filter situations and also creating a natural environment, which it's not absolutely necessary. You can keep no filter tanks with just biologically sound water. You don't even need plants. A lot of people think that you need plants to do these, but you don't have to have them. But if you're trying to breed fish and trying to keep them comfortable, it's really important to have plants because it helps with their comfortability, which helps with their immunity and everything else, which we'll be getting more into here as we go on. And then less filtration, water changes equal more food and microfauna and flora. So if you're breeding fish and you're doing no filter situations, you're getting paramecium, you're getting infusoria, you're getting small algae molecules that your fish can actually eat off of and graze off of, the biofilms and whatnot. And the less I do water changes, the less I disturb these aquariums, the more the fish can get into their societal behaviors, because I'm not putting my hand in there, I'm not changing them up every week, so they get more comfortable in their space, which creates better breeding and more comfort for your fish once again. And then my maintenance and my schedule. So I used to do weekly water changes, and don't get me wrong, water changes aren't bad. They're good for growth for your fish and plants and stuff. So if you do want to do water changes and give it a little freshy fresh, 20% a week or bi-weekly is enough and can really keep your tank in check. You go over 20% into like 50% water changes and stuff, you start knocking the cycles off of certain bacterias and certain biologies that we still don't understand in science form. And currently now, since I'm building my fish room and adding all the new tanks, I haven't done any water changes on some of the tanks for over a year. And most of the fish room has maybe gotten some of the tanks a water change in like 6 months. But I've got fish breeding like crazy. I've got thousands of babies, plants growing like crazy. Hence why some of you guys may have seen me walking around with trash bags. I'm going around playing Planta-Claus. I'm giving away free plants. So all you guys in here, stay around for the end of the talk. I'm gonna chuck some plants out for you guys. To give you guys something to try, because I know a lot of people are scared sometimes to try plants because they're worried they're going to kill them. They don't want to spend their money on it and throw their money away. So if you feel like you're that person, this will be perfect for you. And if you're good at keeping plants, even better, because you're going to end up growing them. So Pro Snail and Placo. I used to use Placos for cleaning my glass. It was really nice and easy way to have to not do maintenance with scraping the glass and stuff. Because when you keep hundreds of aquariums, if you were to have to go scrape them all the time, that'd be my job. And I try not to do that, so I am definitely Pro Snail. They help with all that, and then as well as the Placos. The only thing with the Placos, if you're breeding, I would not use the Placos for your breeding tank because they can predate on eggs. And then natural things that I have used even with ponds. So ponds is kind of what got me into this big time as far as doing the no filter and really connecting with nature. And really that's my goal for everybody and why I teach and express what I've learned, is because more people that we can get to connect with nature, the more appreciation we're going to give to nature, which will just help humanity in a whole. And things that I put in there, the reason why the ponds, I was getting all kinds of different leaves, sticks, everything just flies around, especially on windy days. They just start falling into your ponds. And I started noticing that like my fish were liking it better. They're swimming through it. The leaves actually have beneficial abilities as far as antibacterial, antifungals. There's a lot of cool things if you're not scared of nature, and the more you get in tune to it, the more you learn that you can use it to your advantage with keeping aquariums. Something to keep in mind. And then this also saves tons of money, tons and tons of money. So with Mother Nature, like my substrate now, I grab my sand from my yard. When I used to live in Indiana, I live in Florida now, so because it's mostly sand, but in Indiana we have more clay-based dirt, kind of like you guys do have here in Carolinas. You can actually use that dirt as well. That dirt is actually really nutrient rich because of all that clay that's within it, iron and all kinds of mineralization. And by doing that, using that in my tanks, between all those tanks, I've saved thousands of dollars with that, plus the money that it costs for filters to keep the filters going, the carbon and everything in there. You don't have to worry about it. So little to no equipment costs. And other equipment, high tech. So we will cover some high tech stuff too. I used to do like the hardcore CO2, really colorful painted tanks as well. We'll go through all that as well. And then this is a barb tank that I used to have, just covered in algae. You can see that's about as natural as it gets. Algae is the most universal plant out there in this world. It's everywhere. I was actually keeping arowana in there as well. So when it comes to natural aquariums, it doesn't always mean that it has to be a planted aquarium, and it doesn't only have to be for nanofish. I know a lot of cichlid keepers feel like they can't keep plants in their aquariums, which this is not true. It's just a little more difficult. And what you got to do is you got to think about your hardscape as well when you're creating that cichlid tank environment for your plants. That way you can either wedge them between rocks, you can break up lines of sight. Matter of fact, if you do planted natural aquariums with cichlids, you can keep more cichlids in that tank than you probably could previously due to some territory and dominating problems and aggression because of breaking up those lines of sight with the plants and the rocks. And also when they're already scaped, they're less likely to move things around, especially if it's rocked in really well. So rocks, driftwood, sound biological water, that's the biggest key. I've been to a lot of fish shows, a lot of fish contests, and that's what it really comes down to, is they're using biologically sound water within their environments. They keep these fish in that's it, just the biologically sound water. And I've tested it within my aquariums, no substrate, glass tanks, babies, adults, everything, no filter, and still have had a lot of success. Now you start getting into bigger fish, if you do no filter with them, they have, like I'm talking about 6-7 inches plus. You just need more water volume. That's the hardest part. And then the waste. So if you do a bunch of water changes, the beneficial bacteria that we find in our filter is actually what cleans all that ammonia and nitrate out. So the more you clean that tank out, the harder it is for it to take care of that ammonia and nitrate. So technically the dirtier, the detritus, the mold, the beneficial bacteria, whatever you want to call it, is taking care of all that. And it's actually part of a lot of fish's gut biome. So if you have that in your tank, it becomes a food source as well. for many things. And say you overfeed your tank as well, if you have a lot of that beneficial bacteria in there, it takes care of all that excess food. So the excess food is actually a big cause for a lot of people to have problems with their fish in aquariums, because if that excess food funguses, then you're going to have issues. Your fish are going to get sick, and you're going to be wondering what the heck's wrong with your fish. But floating plants, natural effect on fish. When it comes to plants and their comfortability, floating plants is really key, because a lot of predation comes from the top of the water and from birds and whatnot. So naturally, if you're like moving your hand around, or they catch your shadow when you're going by, it spooks them, it can scare them, it can make them feel less comfortable. But if you got a floating plant in there, the social behaviors that you'll see from them, because they're not worried about the predation, they're more into like what their friend fish is doing. So you see a lot of these cooler behaviors out of them. And driftwood leaves, smooth rocks, and hardy, fast-growing plants. A lot of things you can do with especially cichlids and the bigger fish is guard your plants with rocks by hardscaping around it. That way they don't dig them up, kick them up where they are. And tying plants to driftwood, I like to tie them with quilt thread. A lot of people like to use glue these days. Often your plants, depending on the plants, can grow out of that glue, so you'll just end up with a piece of nice driftwood that you spent a bunch of money on that now has glue globs on it. So I'm a fan of the quilted thread, because even if it grows out of that quilted thread, then you can replace it pretty easy. And then immersed plants and planters, as you can see here in this one, there's a lot of things you can do, like the floating mesh baskets and all kinds of hang-on things that you can grow tons of vegetables. You can do vegetable gardens, aquaponics. That's a whole nother rabbit hole. So we're not going to get into a whole lot of that. But symbiotic relationships, beneficial bacteria, mold, the detritus, the stuff I was talking about, that is the most key symbiotic relationship to your aquarium. I think you'll see the aquarium here later. I'll talk about it. And then the next one, fish and plants. So fish and plants have a very symbiotic relationship too. So when it comes to oxygen and CO2 and just even moving the water around, they help get detritus and stuff off the plants of your leaves. A lot of the algae that'll grow on your plants is usually caused by that detritus just sitting on your leaves. So if you do see like detritus and that mulm sitting on your leaf, if you can just brush it off a little bit, that'll actually save you from growing algae. That's why a lot of people say that you need a high flow for these really high-tech CO2 planted tanks. The real reason why they're not growing algae is because that detritus can't stick on those leaves because of the flow. But that flow will also cause a lot of algae too, because of the hydrogen and nitrogen that gets pumped into the tank. Algae loves nitrogen. And scuds and plants, I like to call scuds. I don't know if you know what they are. They're kind of like little shrimp, little isopods for freshwater. They're like nature's little horticulturalists. They will help trim all the dead leaf material. They'll help clean up any decaying material. So they're actually really beneficial to aquariums, as well as if you've got fish. It's a natural food source. They're really great about hiding in cracks and crevices, so your fish can have something to hunt throughout the day, which anytime you got live food like that, especially with breeding, it's a huge, huge trigger for them. And then CO2 and plants. CO2 is pretty much steroids for plants. A lot of plants really don't need it, but it really helps them to grow fast. And then oxygen in plants, which is important. Once plants start hitting the top of the surface, a lot of our plants aren't 100% aquatic, and their key goal is to stretch up towards the light and up out of the tank. And once they hit up out of the tank and start getting some of that air and oxygen, they look cool. A lot of people will cut them down before this, but I recommend just letting it go. Check that jungle out. You're going to see some really cool stuff happen. They'll start flowering, and they can actually start pulling the air from the top of the water, and they'll just start bushing and growing like crazy. That's how I'm able to grow these like massive masses of plants. And then worms and gardens. You got black worms. You got detritus worms. So you think about if any of you guys are into gardening, worms are really important for gardening. Same thing with aquariums. They can help move your substrate around, eat things, just becomes more of that symbiotic connection of a great natural ecosystem. And then filtration choices, I've been through them all. I haven't really done the matting, but I've seen so many fish rooms through touring on my channel. If you guys check out my channel, LRB Aquatics, I got a whole playlist of tons of fish rooms, tons of different stuff. And hang on the back filters, I used to use those when I first started really on YouTube. I had like maybe 14, actually no, I had more tanks in. But anyways, I started with like 14 tanks, hang on the backs. The thing about the hang on the backs, they will churn the water and they will throw a lot of that nitrogen in, which can also cause algae. So if you can fabricate it, I actually need to revamp the whole filtration hobby and systems. I've been trying to talk to some companies. I haven't found the right one because I don't want to just give it to some goober. I wanted to give it to the right person who's going to appreciate it. But you can modify the hang on the backs to where you can drill a couple holes into it and you can get plastic screws. And if you get like a flat piece of plastic and you can glide the water in instead of having it fall and churn, because let's face it, evaporation happens to all of us. We don't always keep up on evaporation, so the higher that level goes, the more that churning, the more it's going to cause you algae issues and just too much water disruption. So if you can glide the water in, you can also do it with mesh, that mesh fabric stuff for like quilting. And then canister filters. I have a canister filter that I had run for like 4 years, never cleaned it. And it would hardly even trickle water out, but it had the best water quality that you could imagine. Crystal clear, because what happens is it has to push all that water through tiny, tiny microns of bacteria and everything else, and after it gets through all that, there's like nothing left in that water. So a dirty canister filter can actually be much better than a half clean filter. And then sponge filters, I used to run those a lot. I'd even bury those in my sand because I didn't like how they looked. And I used to cut a deli cup, or you could also go to like 7-Eleven or any convenience store, you know, the cups that you put on your styro that has that straw. You just run your airline hose over that, and that will help from your splatter going everywhere else. Because if you have a bunch of airlines, over time it just splatters and splatters. And if you got hard water, that builds up, creates stains. It can get on your wall, it can get everywhere. So you can take those lids and run that through your airline, and that actually creates a guard. And if you want to get fancy with it, you could put some floating plants on top of it and create an island with it, where it actually looks pretty cool. And air stones, pretty much the same thing as a sponge filter, just without the sponge and the beneficial bacteria in it. So it's just moving water around. And if I do use air stones, or if I would use air stones, I would run it at just a little bit of air. A lot of people will turn the air up and just crank it to where it just looks like they're making soup and it's boiling, and it doesn't need that. Us as humans think that fish need a lot more oxygen than they really need. Like, fish are used to just living in the water. And clams, I've tried clams out. It's not a good approach. Not a good approach. It may be good for like a month or a little bit, but eventually that clam's gonna run out of food, and it's so hard to keep up trying to feed those. And then if that clam dies, it's gonna create all kinds of toxicities and you're gonna have a bad time. Nobody wants a bad time. And then Matten filters are actually probably one of the best filters out there as far as keeping and breeding without having to worry about your microorganisms and microfauna getting too beat up, because it pushes the water through and then back out of it, which can hold a lot of that stuff within and on the Matten filter. The only thing I don't like about the Matten filters is it takes about 20% of your fish tank, and it's hard for me to give up 20% of my fish tanks. And then substrate types and bare bottoms. So the inexpensive, like I mentioned, is getting it straight from your yard. As long as you're not spraying your yard with chemicals, or maybe just go out to the woods somewhere with a shovel, or you got a buddy or something. I usually take off the top with the roots in the grass, and then I dig what's underneath there, and then I'll spread it out on either a piece of cardboard or get like a little kiddie pool, and then I'll let the sun cook it out. That way it cleans out any bugs, it cleans out any bacteria, and it usually over a day. The sun will radiate everything out of it, and it works really well. That's as cheap as you can get free. And if you want to know more about how I do that, I also got videos showing that on my channel as well. And then you got the higher end like Eco Complete, Brightwell, ADA, the Stratum, and more. Stratum's probably my least favorite of them all just because it's so hard to clean, real pain in the butt. But Brightwell's a acidic substrate, so different substrates have different properties. Eco Complete's more for your hard water fish. It can actually hold more nutrients, but the only problem is it's made out of lava rock. And if you're using any kind of lava rock, you need to be mindful of your fish, especially for like Corydoras. They can hurt their barbels and stuff from grazing and picking on it. So you do have to watch out for the lava rock. And then ADA, that's another acidic substrate. And these acidic substrates, especially if you got hard water, can be good for growing plants, because when you're growing plants, plants actually need some acidity to break down the mineralization within the water so they can actually uptake the minerals. Because if that's just hard water and they don't have the ability to uptake the minerals, for certain plants it can be harder to do. Some plants, they just don't care. You can pretty much put them in anything. And then laterite, which is more of the clay base, which you guys got here in your soil, is pretty much the same thing. And then substrate lasagna, I used to do tests where I'd make like different types of substrate layers and everything. One thing I learned from that is that it's best to minimize it to maybe 2 or 3 layers. So if you want to do like a very thin layer on the bottom of your aquarium with like laterite or clay base, that's going to be your slow release nutrients for like your root feeders and your other plants. And then you could do like maybe some Brightwell or sand or something in between, and then or cap it off with gravel, whatever look you're looking for. So say you want a certain look, you don't have to be that dedicated to the full substrate to look like that. You can actually layer what you want, say if it doesn't have any nutrient value. So. And then driftwood, rocks and leaves. Hardscape is the backbone to aquascaping. So we're gonna get into aquascaping a little more here. This is one of my aquascaping tank from Aquatic Experience in Chicago in 2017. This is the tank that I was talking to you about that has the filter that I haven't changed in 4 years. Like ever since I set that tank up, I never even got into the filter once. It would stop a little bit and then I'd just kind of hit the plunger, the primer. It'd chuck out some grody stuff into the tank. The fish would eat it all, they loved it. And then like a few hours later it's crystal clear again. So when it comes to hardscaping, you see how there's a lot of rock there and a lot of, well, you can't really see the rock, but all the sticks and stuff. The trick is when you're aquascaping is trying to give a deeper perspective of the tank than what the tank size really is. So the tank in the video, about that wide, but it actually looks like it's this wide because of layers. With that hardscape, I was able to make layer after layer after layer, which creates more points of view. And then it comes to rocks. As far as rocks, some people can be skittish about rocks. I have never met a rock I didn't like. You got sandstone rocks, which will just break down in the stand. You got some that hold calcium, actually have a lot of beneficial bacteria, or not bacteria, but beneficial value to like shrimp and just remineralization to your aquariums. And a big test for the rocks is doing a scratch test. So when I was a kid, I used to play with the rocks in my grandparents' driveway, and on the concrete I would like write my names with one. And the ones you can write your name with, those are the ones that will break down and add mineralization into your aquarium. Now if you don't want that in your aquarium, try to go with the ones that don't scratch. And those are going to be inert. They're not going to have any effect on any of your water quality. And then different sizes. When it comes to aquascaping, you don't want to just think about one rock size. You actually want to work yourself gradually. So have your big rock, medium rock, smaller rock, and then even fine dust if you want to. That way it creates that natural graduation as if it was really breaking down within the system. And let's see, leaves, many leaves out there, which can make it look more natural. A lot of people don't use leaves in their aquascaping, but if you ask me, in a natural aquascaping, it's what you see out in nature very often. And I've used pretty much all the leaves out there. I haven't used like poison ivy or anything, because I'm not trying to mess with that. Who wants to mess with that? But I haven't found any leaves that have been an issue either. From catappa leaves, Indian almond leaves, oaks, maples, elms, mulberries, nettles, bushes. I used to just cut bushes and just shove like whole big bushes within my ponds and just call that a summer. It was the fish cover and everything. And I'd just get a heck of babies out of it. And you got driftwoods that are soft and hard as well. So like your Malaysian and bogwood, that will actually break down over time and it creates more acidity. But then you have like manzanita, which is more of a hardwood, which doesn't quite break down. So the softer woods will make your water more acidic faster than your harder woods will, to a point that it might have an effect. The harder driftwoods, they don't have that big of an effect on your water system to where you have to really worry about your parameters. And we're going to talk about parameters here in a little bit too, because it's really important. Because I don't mess with parameters much. My whole spiel at the end of this is taking the human error out of it. When we chase parameters, it becomes a problem. We start creating these cycles that we either get within our head that we are messing things up, or this is the cause of that, or this is the cause of that, and we try to find ways to blame it. But we'll be talking about that more. I used to actually boil a bunch of my driftwood too in a turkey fryer. Anymore though, I just throw it out in the sun and let the sun radiate it. Kind of like when people would clean their clothes back in the day, where they'd do it on the clothesline. And not everybody had a washer back in the day, so they just let the sun clean it out for them. Because radiation, lighting options, plant biomass and balance. So when it comes to your lighting, you do want to think about your plant biomass, what type of plants you're using as far as the strength of your light. So if you got more massive plants, you probably want stronger lights if you're planning on doing like a huge planetscape. But if you're planning on doing like sparse planting, go more dim. We often go with more light than is necessary for a lot of plants. A lot of plants don't really need that much light. I've grown tanks where I've layered my plants to where I'm growing like 3 plants underneath each other. So there's like a top plant, middle plant, and a bottom plant, to where you can't even, there's hardly much light in there, but everything's growing. It's pretty wild. And over and under lighting, like I mentioned, we overlight very often. So almost better to underlight, especially if you're dealing with algae. I've got many of my tanks now that I don't even have light on. They're getting the ambient light of the fish room because there's enough light in there that it has been growing really well. And then natural sunlight is probably the best light that you can put on a fish, but it's the trickiest to keep in check because it can grow green water and everything else. But if you can get just that little bit of natural light to hit your tank, like in a certain time of the day, it will show these spectacular colors on your fish that you would never see, and they will play in the sunlight. It's amazing. And then the LEDs, which is fairly new to the hobby. When I first started doing plants, we were doing the high outputs, the T5s, and we would grow some crazy big bushy plants. Now with the LEDs, it's a little different. They kind of miniaturize things. I was just talking to somebody about corals, and it actually has changed the coral hobby too on the way that things grow. And I think a big reason of this is that LEDs don't have the radiation that the high outputs or the like the T5s or the compact fluorescents have. Matter of fact, compact fluorescent lights, which I wish they made more incandescent hooded light hoods for aquariums, because those little spiral bulbs have grown some of the best plants for me, and it's due to the radiation that comes out of them. Not a lot of people talk about radiation in plant growth. This is actually something that just kind of came to mind, well, not with the plants, but knowing about the corals. So I figured I'd share that with you guys today. But metal halides, way too much. That's a saltwater thing. Don't bother with it in the freshwater. it's gonna get bananas. And then duration, I've seen some of the most beautiful aquascape tanks at only 5 hours durations a day, but you can do it up to 10. So depending on your light, depending on your tank, depending on your approach, is kind of how you want to choose that. For me, I could never do 5 hours. I want to see my tank for at least 10 hours, especially having 300. I would definitely miss some of them. So par, lumens, once again, the strength of your light, think about that, how deep it can get, the tank size that you have. If you have a deeper tank, say 40 gallons and above, you're gonna want a stronger light, like maybe 4,000 lumens. If you have like a 10,000 or a 10-gallon tank or a 20-gallon tank, a more shallow tank, you're gonna want more closer to 2,000 lumens. And algae control. So the existence of algae will always be there. It doesn't matter how clean. You can buy all the, what do they call those, where they had the plants in the gel. What's that called again? Tissue cultures, thank you. So a lot of people do the tissue cultures and they think, oh, well, I can avoid algae this way. Well, that's not the truth because it's in the air. It's in the air. I don't know how to explain it, but it's everywhere. And it will get in there. And it's how natural systems balance themselves. So I like to consider algae Mother Nature's equalizer. So if there's imperfections and imbalances within that tank and impurities, that's when algae comes up to take care of that. If algae didn't exist, we'd be killing fish left and right because this what helps take care of it. And then occasional algae, it happens. It'll always happen, and this is why people do maintenance. So you can scrape it off, you can pick it out manually. Now that I have so many tanks and don't do as much maintenance, I'll let my tanks just algae out to where the green hair algae just covers over. But I don't worry about my plants because I know my plants are even growing up under. Granted, they may not always be growing the best, but they'll still be there. But I can just pull that out as one whole piece after it covered the whole tank, and then I end up with more plants and stuff. So it's really wild. And it happens, so you just gotta manually remove what you can, and it's best to do that right before a water change. And then once you add your water back in, the oxygenation will actually break up the algae that's within the water column so it doesn't end up regrowing so much. And then plant versus plant, which this is really wild, especially if you start looking at the woods and looking at forests. The same thing happens in our aquariums to where plants battle. There are plant wars going on around us all the time that people just don't even realize. And it happens in the aquarium as well, allopathy, where some plants don't get along with certain plants, and some plants actually help other plants, where you can grow them into each other and create marshes and whatnot. And scuds, gammarus, and monos. Once again, the scuds are kind of like the horticulturalists that will clean up your plants for you. And the monos act in the same kind of fashion. Supply the plant, not the algae. So feed the plants, you can fertilize. I actually don't fertilize right now, so not all plants need fertilization, but it can help for growth if that's what you're really looking for. And by feeding the plant, you help grow the plant healthier to the point where algae can't really get a hold and it's able to uptake more of your nutrients, excess nutrients, instead of the algae. And fish food is actually one of the biggest causes for your algae growth, and where a lot of, you can even get further mineralization just out of your fish food alone, because some of them have iron in them, calcium, and other things. And, oh, I didn't know that was a video, but this was a battle. I was battling with a bunch of buchet and all kinds of weird algae. It's some of the weirdest hair algae. But that's what you do, you just clean it up, move it around, move your stuff around. And then natural tank maintenance. Snails are great for natural maintenance, just getting into nooks and crannies that you can't, of decaying material like leaves or driftwood, biofilm and everything. Plants, once again, as we covered. Daphnia. Daphnia is one of my favorites as far as especially a no filter situation. If you've got green water or just even kind of cloudy water, throw some Daphnia in there. It'll clean it up. If there's no fish to eat them, and especially if you're breeding though, So this is how I like to set up my breeding tanks, is I'll start them off with like, I'll let them get green water in them or just get dingy, and then throw the Daphnia in there. And then I'll throw, after maybe 2 or 3 weeks, I'll throw in my breeders. And what happens is that Daphnia is the #1 signal for fish to breed, because during the spring is when Daphnia shows up. And that tells the fish it's springtime, it's breeding time, there's food in the system, we can have babies. And it will get them every time, every time. Some of the trickiest fish to breed, if you do the Daphnia, it's a heck of a trigger, heck of a trigger. And once again, scuds are great cleaners. Auto sinkless are great if you don't want the big old plecos, tiny little catfish that you can get. And clams, covered those weren't that great. Shrimp, same thing, it's kind of like the snails. They get into the cracks, crevices. They can also be a food source for your fish if you want that. This is a 180-gallon bow front. There's actually like thousands of orange shrimp in that aquarium, and there's probably like 200 some fish. A raw catfish like that big, rainbows like yay big, and they still manage to survive and live there. When this tank actually finally sprung a leak, being a bow front, I ended up moving all that rock, and those shrimp actually ended up tunneling underneath a lot of that rock like ants would. So you could see like the trails and the cavities and stuff that they had created this big metropolis out of. It was really wild. And then there's a lot of cleaner fish. I try not to target fish for my cleaning and my maintenance, because then, I don't know, are you really taking care of the problem, or are you just trying to band-aid it? So be careful about that. A lot of people recommend certain fish for certain things, but one I will recommend is the Siamese algae eater. They are good cleaners, and the reason why I recommend this is because you can actually buy them real small, and it's when they're real small, they eat all the algae. When they get bigger, they don't eat it as much. So if you get them small, and then they get big, usually you can take them back to the fish store and they will give you more money for it. Clown loaches, there's a hack in that one too. So get some little clown loaches, grow them out to bigger, they'll give you more money for the size of them. And there's a few fish you can do that with. I used to pay for my food and other things by doing that kind of stuff when I was first getting into it. And Corydoras, they're great at just cleaning up the sand, getting that sand turned over. That way you don't have like that incrustation of algae or even mineralization growing on it. And they'll kick it around for you. They're great at sifting. And then shrimp, the benefits of shrimp, Neocaridina. Neocaridina's are your hard water shrimp. A lot of people know me from shrimp because I won international contests. I've done the judging for them, and that's a whole world that's just been blowing up like crazy, and they keep coming out with new types. If you haven't kept shrimp, I definitely recommend just checking it out. It's a fun thing to do. The thing I love about my tanks is being able to look into the tank and just seeing different things here and there, and that's a great addition for that. And your Neocaridinas, they like the hard water. You can see all that mineralization growing up on there. But these tanks are as dirty as can be. It's the way they love it. And a lot of people think that if you mix shrimp that they will turn brown, and this isn't quite the case. You will get some wild types, but they don't all turn brown. It actually follows the color wheel. So if you get a red shrimp and a blue shrimp, you can make purple shrimp. They may not always come out that way, but down in the mutation in the line, it will eventually happen. And the Caridinas, they are more soft water, so if you got acidic conditions with your tanks, you're going to want to go towards the Caridina. And I've been learning and changing kind of things in the way that people keep them. So it was thought that you had to buy this fancy, expensive acidic substrate for them, which currently now I'm breeding them in my Florida well water with just sand and no filter. And many people thought you had to have filters for them too, so it's not quite true. It's just you need that acidity within your water to break down their molt. Because if the water's too hard for them, the molt, that's what will kill them. They need that acidity to be able to get through their shell. And I only run my TDS. I don't follow pH. pH is a goose chase because it also reads per hydrogen. So this is why a lot of people blame things on pH spikes. And I know this goes against the grain, but the reason why pH spikes happen is because you're reading hydrogen molecules after that water change. That's why you can do a water change and your pH just be off the roof, and then like maybe a couple days later it's down low. It's because it's reading that hydrogen. So I actually test TDS, which is your total dissolved solids. That'll give you a better idea of whether you got acidic water or alkalytic water. 200 is your neutral area. Anything underneath that is your acidity. Anything above that is your alkalinity. So as long as if you're keeping them within an alkalytic range for the neocaridinias, you're good. And if you're keeping it in an acidic range for caridinias, then you're good on those. And then there's lots of other shrimp, like bamboo shrimp and vampire shrimp and whatnot. I haven't played around with those very much, but they are out there. Check them out if that may be something you may want to get, because there's some neat stuff out there. And then crayfish, those things are just crazy. I've kept a few of them, the Clark Eye, and they just like to battle a lot, so you're gonna need space and cracks and crevices and hiding points for them, because they're rambunctious. They don't look like they're rambunctious in a tank, but at night, I don't know what they do, they go bananas. I've actually had that 180-gallon bow front in my living room, and about, I would say, 25, 30 feet away from it was my kitchen, and I had found one of my crayfish up underneath my refrigerator after I had to pull my refrigerator out of it. And I was like, oh, well, that's where he went. So, them things are crazy, but they're cool. There's a lot of different types of them too. And then herd instincts, aquatic life reactions to large and small tanks. So when you keep fish into bigger groups, you get a lot more different behaviors and societal things out of them. So if you're really wanting a tank to just watch all the time, like these catfish, they're kind of like a little mini swarm of shark. Absolutely love this tank. And you can just see how they feel more comfortable. Normally this fish, really skittish. Like if you had 2 or 3 of these and you put them in a tank, they'd be hiding here and there. You maybe see them at night. But since there's so many of them, they just come out and just go crazy, and you can enjoy them more. And then dither fish as well. When you get those, say you only do have a few fish of a certain type, because let's face it, not everybody can have and go. It gets expensive if you're trying to build a big group like that. And a big reason why I started breeding fish is because I wanted big groups like that. That's the best way to do it, is breed them yourself. And the dither fish will help make those fish feel more comfortable when you don't have the mass herds of them. And then substrates, landscapes, and colorations. This is a big, big key to when you're keeping your fish, is does your substrate complement the contrast to your fish? So rainbow fish, for instance, if I put them on a black substrate, the colors are gonna pop like crazy. A lot of people say that their rainbows don't turn on, or they only turn on like in the morning or evening. But if you keep them in a dark lit tank, like a dark background, dark substrate, they will pop all the time. The colors will be there. But if you put them on a white substrate, white background, they're gonna flush out. They're not gonna show. As you notice with these, see how the color contrasts with the black and white? It just pops. So think about that with your fish and shrimp as well. It will make a big difference in your aquarium. Okay, that's another video. Biotopes and benefits of replication. So it's not always necessary, but can be beneficial. So Heiko Blair, he made a book about all kinds of waterways, and I think it was South America. He may have different books about it now, but he actually related certain plants into certain waterways. So anytime that you can get those plants that actually go with your fish, they have this natural trigger, like this is very familiar, this is what I want to breed on. And it can actually play a big role into how your fish feel about their environment that you're keeping them in. And then plant and landscape familiarity, that goes into the same thing. A natural breeding ground, any day, this is what natural breeding ground looks like, besides the stem plants usually, but algae, and just recreating that, it makes breeding so much easier. And biotope sources, like I mentioned, the internet is really good, and Heiko Blair book is really good. In breeding community and species only, this This is actually one of the wildest videos right here. This is a golden wonder killifish breeding with 2 Siamese algae eaters. Now, if I could have got a baby out of that, that would have been, could you imagine an algae eating killifish? That'd been pretty wild. This was actually one of my first videos on YouTube. That was before I was even a YouTuber. I was like, this is the weirdest thing, I've got to at least video it. But there they are trying. But there's many ways of breeding. One of my favorite ways to breed fish is musical fish. So I'll have my fish in my breeding group, whether it be a trio, a group, or a pair, in an aquarium, and then I'll let them marinate in there for like a month, depending on the type, maybe 2 months, and then I'll move them into another tank. And with these natural environments, they end up breeding. You may not see it, but they're very often there'll be eggs in there, and then after I pull the group out, I won't touch the tank for maybe a couple weeks, and that's how I get a lot of my babies, is just by playing musical fish. Then there's also spawning mops where you can target breed, where if you want, to me it's kind of more work to deal with the spawning mops. Musical fish just makes it super easy because all I got to do is catch the fish. But if you do spawning mops, you can target breed to where you just pull the eggs out and then put them into another container, and then you have to deal with it that way. And then rock piles, egg scatterers. So rock piles has actually become one of my newest favorite, because now I can breed fish without playing musical fish. I've got these rare Dawkinsia cymlus barbs, which are fairly big fish, and they breed all the time. The hardest part is collecting the eggs. And a fish that big, it's hard to build like an egg trap collection system for it. So what I did is I created rock piles across the whole aquarium. And I've tested it as well where I've just had a mound. And it's worked both ways. But what they'll do is they'll breed and throw their eggs into the rock. And this is very common in nature, is fish will just throw their eggs out, and that's where the eggs land, is within the rock. And in the rock, there is so many microorganisms. So as the fry and everything grow out, they're grazing through it. They don't have to worry about all the adult food. They don't have to worry about the adult predation. They can naturally just grow up into the tank. So those Dawkinsia cymlus barbs, last time I moved them, I had like over 300 babies out of them, but there was fish about yay big with them. The only reason why I moved them was just to test out the theory into another tank, which is a current project that I've actually been doing, and it's been working absolute wonders. And then when it comes to shrimp breeding as well, rock piles, endlers, guppies, all kinds of stuff with the rock piles. Even your cichlids, the mouth breeders, they need rock piles just to hide off and feel comfortable in as well. Mesh baskets, another one I like to do. So you get the like floating planer mesh baskets. You can get the pipe insulation, that foam stuff, or a pool noodle, and zip tie it onto those. And then you can put your group of fish in there, and they will be breeding all day, especially like tetras, rasboras, danios, and stuff like that. Give them a little top coverage so they feel comfortable. That's the big key, is that top coverage, because if you have them in that little mesh basket without that top covered, they're less likely to breed. So if you put them in there, then they start dropping all the eggs out. I'll put like one of those in, it's like yay big. And I'll put that in a 75 gallon. For instance, my CPDs, my celestial pearl danios, they're just, I've got a massive school of them now, just from like 8 that I had in one of those baskets. And now I've got probably a school of 100 in a 75 gallon, just from letting it sit there and do its thing. To where I don't have to do any collecting, I don't have to do any picking, I don't have to do any extra feeding. It just keeps reproducing. Nice little hack. And then you got certain fish, like a lot of rainbow fish. I know dwarf neons are very known for their community breeding. What I've learned more from the community breeding, if you feed more often, like 2 to 3 times a day, then it will make your fish less likely to predate. So a lot of my rainbow fish now, I'll feed them 2 to 3 times a day. And rainbow fish, they naturally, their babies will go straight to the top of the water. And now I can just collect them out because I'm feeding them multiple times a day. They're less likely to predate, and I'm just scooping babies out without having to do any extra work. And I could do it all day long. So it makes it really easy when you kick up the feeding more. But once again, if you're feeding heavy with these low tech, no filter situations where you got a lot of that beneficial bacteria, you don't have to worry about that overfeeding so much because those microorganisms are going to take care of that for you. And community breeding, that's pretty much the same thing as colony breeding. Well, actually, that's not true. Community breeding, I'm actually breeding Shelleys, and so I got a 470-gallon pond that has rainbow fish, tetras, Shelleys, catfish. I'm actually breeding Shelleys out in with all these fish, and my rainbows are like yay big, they're huge. And I'm also breeding the catfish out of there too. I've got a trap in there that I'm breeding within the community tank that I can collect their eggs. If you guys want to see more of this kind of stuff, definitely recommend checking out the channel LRB Aquatics on YouTube. That's where I do most of my educating on what I do and where you'll get and find the best information on what I'm doing. But you can still breed in community tanks if done properly. Benefits of breeding and raising in dirty natural tanks. So lots of natural food, like I mentioned, that microflora, microfauna is going to be in there for them to eat, parameciums and fusarias, and lots of places for fry to hide, because even babies get predated off each other, where the big ones will try to eat the small ones. So if you do have Daphnia, you do have live microorganisms in there, they're less likely to chase and try to eat each other. And lots of places to throw eggs as well. And then comfortability, it's all key. Key is comfortability, because the immunity of the fish comes from its comfortability. If the fish is not comfortable, if it's always feeling stressed, like if you're tensed up in the cold all the time, you're not gonna wanna live. You're gonna be like, this sucks, I just wanna die. So it's the same thing with your fish. So the more you can make them comfortable, that's really the key. That's the whole reason why I moved to Florida too from Indiana, because screw those winters. If old man winter was real, I'd kick him in the balls. Water change versus no water change and dissolved oxygen. So in my experience, I don't know if that's a video, it is a video. In my experience with the water change, with no water change, I can kind of keep my fish room in a homeostasis as far as like my plants and things. They don't grow as fast. If I were to do water changes, I wouldn't be able to keep up with it with all the plant tanks that I have right now, with why I'm trying to add more tanks. Because I do have 300 right now. I'm trying to kick that up to 400 within like hopefully 6 months or so. But with the water change, it re-oxygenates your water for you. That's why I recommend a little bit now and then to add that little freshness to it if you're really trying to grow those plants, because those plants will grab what oxygen you put in there and it will help them grow. And then as far as maintenance, hose sizes. When it comes to pulling your water out, siphoning your water out, big hose gauge, you can pull the water out fast. You want that quick water change, get you a big hose. If you got to do detail, smaller hose, it will give you more time to actually detail around your tank. And I would usually do like a little detail work, like maybe every so few months or whatever your tank depends on, and then do the fast water changes for like your weekly. So you can kind of have control of what you're doing with just the hose selection that you choose by buying yourself more time or making it faster. And plants and fish, some fish, it is important to do water changes, especially when you're trying to grow them out as babies, but it's not always necessary. There's many fish that you don't have to do water changes on. But like rainbow fish, they're gonna need water changes to help grow bigger. Rice fish, endlers, guppies, they don't really care. So there's a lot of information on like which fish is that, which fish does that, which once again, I'm gonna have to relate you to my YouTube channel to get further information on that kind of stuff. And then changing parameters naturally and how nature changes parameters. So when we read stuff online about where the fish came from, those tests and those parameters are taken at that time usually, and it's not every day that people are out there collecting fish and collecting the water samples and seeing what they do. You get rain, you get dilution, You get droughts, you get saturation, and it changes. It's not always the same. Nature has seasons, and we've got to think about that. And it happens in all water body types. And even the debris can change your water parameters as well. Like say if it's in the fall time, a bunch of leaves fall in there, that's going to create more acidity than it did have in say the spring or the summer. So it does happen naturally to where your parameters will be different for fish. And actually in my old fish room, I had this water system where I can actually create any parameter that I wanted. I had a 3,000 gallon a day RO system, but then I also had liquid rock water. It was like 400 TDS. So I could blend it to pretty much everything. And I had switched my whole fish room, which was hard water, off to soft water. And I didn't have any issues. And this is out of 300 tanks. And I didn't have any issues with that transition over months and months. The only thing that ended up happening after I started going towards the softer water is I started lacking more mineralization. So then I just started topping off with my hard water, which would help balance off that lack. So there's different ways you can play that by knowing your water and your hardness, your TDS. And then, oh, that was a video. So this is actually from a heated outdoor pond system that I had. In Indiana, we'd get negative 40-degree weather out there, crazy snows, super cold. I was actually keeping all this year round with 500-watt heaters that I'd put them in. These Odysseas, they're actually pretty cheap. You can get them off eBay. They're only like 50 or 70 bucks, which is a steal for that many watts of heat. And it would just grow like crazy. Big trick if you want to do something like that, a heated pond outdoor system, is to cover the top of it. But once again, if you want to learn more about those, I got a whole playlist on how I created that. I did like a PVC frame, a housing insulation, and because I mean, if you do summer tubbing, I don't know how many of you guys get into summer tubbing or keeping stuff outside. Yeah, the worst part is wanting to break it down in the fall. Like, that's a pain in the butt. And if you can have, especially in the dead of winter, if you can go out like on those decent days and be able to enjoy something like this, it helps with that seasonal depression. I had suffered from that winter depression big time, and it would help me a lot. And pinpointing problems, taking the human error out of the equation. Fluctuation happens. If you chase parameters, if you always try to pinpoint parameters, trying to put this in the tank, like this chemical in the tank or this chemical in the tank, trying to get your tank to where you think it should be, actually ends up creating a lot of issues within keeping, because you start battling things and then things start battling themselves. If you let nature will nature. Nature has been doing this for eons. A lot of people like to call certain methods. I don't like to call this like a LRB method or anything like that, because it's not my method. It's nature's method. It's what nature has been doing forever. Mother Nature knows what she's doing, way beyond what we know. We're just barely scratching the surface, honestly. When it comes to science, bacterias, and the things that actually are really happening within our aquariums, we are still just barely scratching the surface. And don't freak out. When things happen, don't freak out. I've seen so many issues with, like, some people have a problem with the fish, and they will just nuke their whole tank thinking like this thing's in there, and then it just causes problems for their beneficial bacteria. It causes problems for their other fish. For example, when we get fish from big box stores, they're usually passed from another country where they've been medicated and shipped to, and then to a wholesaler where they've been medicated and shipped to, and then to the store where they've been medicated and shipped to, and then by the time they get home, they get medicated. And at that point, their immunity is shot. And when it comes to fish, keeping a good immunity is key, and keeping that comfortability helps that immunity. So the less you stress your fish and try nuking them, then less problems you're going to have. But in fish as well, and this happens after you keep fish for a certain time, there's other diseases that happen that get blamed for other diseases. For instance, Fish can have cancers. Fish can have lumps and cysts, and just not every fish is going to live the same because they're not the same, just like us humans. So we've got to think about that with our fish too, so you don't always have to battle. So if you do have a fish showing problems, always best to just take them out and put them in a hospital. Then if you can tell that that's not affecting any other fish in your aquarium, then you don't have to medicate your nice system. You can just pinpoint the fish that you have in that hospital tank and approach it to whatever needs you need to do. And if you want to learn more about like those kind of things, because there's so many variables, once again, my YouTube channel covers a lot of those. And I do a Friday night live Q&A. So every week I offer myself to the community and everybody to ask questions about this, because a lot of what I do is different, and I know there is a lot of questions, and we're going to be doing questions after this too, because they're my favorite, and this is how we learn. Questions are the best. And don't ever be afraid to ask questions. More questions we ask in life, the more we learn. And you can find me more on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter. I don't do a whole lot on Twitter. I do a little bit on Instagram, Facebook, and I actually do TikTok a little bit now too. And then I do have a website where I sell the stuff that I grow. I don't wholesale anything. Everything's all homebred, all home raised. It's just easier for me that way, and I enjoy it. And if you want good stuff, you can find it there. But all right, that's the talk. And any questions? Yes. Okay.
One, internal parasites.
Okay.
How do you, like, I have guppies that, like, I've been watching online, and some of them are wasting away and that kind of stuff. How do you deal with guppy wasting and maybe internal parasites?
Okay, so internal parasites and like wasting disease. So there's wasting disease actually comes more from like a bacterial infection. So you can actually fix that with general cure. That's the best way to treat wasting disease, because that actually is pretty common in rainbow fish. And then when it comes to internal parasites like worms, there's certain ones that you need to use fenbendazole for or levamisole for. And the way to figure that out is either just start with the fenbendazole or the levamisole, and if that didn't work, then give it the time for the other to work, because
Fenbendazole, that is just the dog wormer? Like,
yeah, the dog dewormer.
and is there a way to measure dosage?
So when we battle planaria in the shrimp world, we would do 0.1 gram per 10 gallons. And we would let that marinate for 72 hours, and then we'd do a 25% water change. And then that takes care of your worms. But like calamus worms, you're going to need something like levamisole for. And those you can usually see, those will be hanging out of the back of your fish and stuff. Yeah, 0.1 gram per 10. Yep. And then if that doesn't take care of the issue, then hit them with the levamisole.
And a second question.
Yes.
Same thing, guppies. I'm in Atlanta, and I'm a high school teacher, and I want to retire in 10 years and just live off my selling my fish.
Yeah.
So I'm just starting it now. So my background is all in, everything you're seeing is like my whole college, background. So like complete. My problem is heat. We don't have heat in the basement.
Okay.
And you were saying like, being up north, cold. It's not, there's no walls. And we looked into getting a breaker down there, and they wanted like $22,000.
Oh my.
For a breaker.
Yeah.
So what do I do for?
So you have no walls?
It's studded out,
Okay.
and there's insulation on the outside.
So you have insulation. So a great way to heat that is you could use a space heater to heat the room, because that radiator heater it helps keep a more consistent heat within that environment. And what happens is your tanks also become a radiator heater, because they will hold that warmth. And what you can do is put your heaters on the bottom tanks, and that heat will rise. So if you cover the bottom, because the cold concrete, I don't know if you have concrete, yeah, the concrete will get cold. So the bottom ones, as long as you got heaters on there and then a space heater, that's how I used to do my garage in Indiana with the negative 40 degrees.
There's like foam boards around. Do you think that would help insulate in the rack?
It would, but I don't think it would be necessary. Yeah. And it'd break up your visualizations, and with aquariums, it's all about visualization. Yeah. I used to do that where I'd run like the extension cords from this outlet to that outlet. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm in trouble with the
Yeah. But if you can get your heaters out of the middle and the top tanks, that's going to save you a lot of power. Yeah, because hot air rises. Yep. And then those tanks act like radiator heaters. They hold it in. Matter of fact, with my barn, I open it up to nature all the time, and the ranges in there change so much, but it takes all data for like just a few degrees to even switch out of my tanks because they hold so much of that heat within them.
And then I just want to thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
And like a ray of light as a teacher, I don't know, we perfection so bad.
Yeah, I know. I haven't got any better. Yeah. You're welcome. The big reason why I did this too is because my kid, you're gonna make me cry now. Don't be doing that. But it's okay. I'm not a crier either. I'm a military brat, so I was grown to suppress that stuff. But so my kid, I would have either had to pay for his daycare, work all day, never get to see him, and so I was like, I don't want to do that. I want to do what I want to do and figure out a way to be able to stay at home with him and actually enjoy life. And this hobby, it let me do that. So, I mean, you can't put a price on that.
But you helped me like keep going to work. I got 10 years left. I've done this in 20 years, and I've got 10, and it's the retirement and the healthcare, and I want out so bad. It's just I can't fix it.
Just keep working on it. Keep that motivation.
Probably in the room, but the whole system is just crumbling around me. And it's just very
I know.
disheartening.
I hope it changes soon.
I'm crying, Lucas.
Yeah. She's getting us all. It's okay.
Because of you, and I'm just gonna start throwing nature at them and just be like, you're getting dirty. Like,
You got the motivation now, you got the goal, you know what you want. Keep reminding yourself what you want, and you'll get there.
like once I retire, I'm retired and finished. That's my next. Because I'm not even retired, you don't do nothing. It's stupid.
Right. There's actually people that retire like that and do nothing, they end up not having much to live for. So life is for the living. That's why a lot of people, like, if they don't have nothing to do, nothing to take their time, well, I mean,
I'm on your
you
live.
lose hope.
I watch you on live. My name's Brandy.
Okay,
So
awesome.
TV.
Yeah, I love to know the YouTube handle. That way I can put names to faces and stuff.
Brandy.
Okay, nice meeting you, Brandy. Yes, nice meeting you. All right, any other questions? Yes.
So I just started up my own maintenance business, and I'm wondering if you have any advice that you can speak to specifically for planted freshwater systems and having success with them when you're only in front of them once or twice a month.
Okay, so the biggest key for you with maintenance would be that hose difference that I talked about, where you can get that fast water change or that detailed water change. And the difference between month to month, if you're not seeing it, can be variable depending on what's happening in that system. But really, being a maintenance guy, I mean, that's your job, is to go fix those problems that has maybe occurred within that month, or at least clean them up and make them look nice. So it's really just what you're doing. So there's no real special trick besides that hose thing that can save you time. But as far as if you can keep decaying materials like snails, scuds, things in those tanks. That can help your maintenance because the algae will eat off of those decaying like leaves and stuff that you may not be able to get to. Like some major aquascapers, they do a like every week or every few days where they're picking every leaf out. If they see one like floating around, they're on it. But obviously you can't do that if you're gone for a month. So if you can have something to help clean that up for you, then it'll help you out.
Thank you so
Yep.
much.
You're welcome. Yep. Any other questions? Yes.
No question. I just want to share. I love the channel. Your physical is awesome. It's really really inspiring. Something to look forward to maybe in the future.
Awesome.
Get on that level. And I have some of your Blue Star anthems that are doing great.
Awesome, man. I appreciate the support. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yes.
How do I convince my girlfriend to let me get more tanks?
It's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. That's how I did it. I would just come home with a truck full of tanks and be like, well, here I am. Love me or leave me. So that's about the easiest way to do that. Because if you ask, you're going to get friction. And then that's going to cause more friction. I know. It may be tricky, but that's the way to do it. All right, any other questions? Yes.
Thank you for watching you for years.
Awesome.
Have fun to the trip. Just how did you get the name or the nickname Shrimp Jesus?
I guess it's just the way I look, and then people just like to talk. So, I mean, they started calling me Shrimp Jesus. That's what it was. And Green Water Wizard. There's a few other ones out there. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for the support. Thank you. All right, any other questions? All right, I think that's the least questions I've ever had with the talk. So that I feel like I'm getting through to people finally. So that's good. Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much. Oh, wait. I got something else for you guys. You can clap if you want. I don't mind claps. Thank you. All right, you guys ready? All right, watch your eyes. You don't want to get poked in the eyes. But I'm about to fling some plants out for you guys. And these are all easy to keep. You can either float them or you can either plant them. They've been grown with no ferts, no CO2, super easy. So get ready. Oh, and if you find a pink plant in there, I may have bought that one. I forgot. Maybe I'll do this half and half. Yeah, throw some in the bag. It's like a parade. Yeah, here you go.
Thank you.
Anybody not get a plant?